What's going on, guys? This is Pete, aka Characters, and we are back with the Carrot Poker podcast. This is the special, or the first of many specials for the new book launch, which is 100 Hands, the book I'm currently working on. So what I've done is I've gone and brought my brand newest student, Laurie, onto the show today. How's it going, man?
Yeah, I'm good. How you doing?
Pretty good, yeah. This is definitely the first time I've ever done a podcast with someone before I've even met them, like before I've even done a coaching lesson.
Risky business.
Absolutely. I don't know what you're going to do, but since you pay me money, I'm assuming you're not going to sabotage my podcast. That wouldn't really be worth it, right? Just to sabotage me. Yeah. So we're going to talk about a few hands from the new book today. So this is kind of cool. So there's 100 hands in the book. They're not all written up yet, the analyses. But I said to Laurie, as I'm going to say to anyone else that comes on, give me a few numbers between 1 and whatever I'm up to. So you decided to choose all even numbers, strangely enough. Maybe that, I don't know what that says about your personality, but it probably says something if I was a psychiatrist. But the even numbers are actually the hands where I've played them myself at 50NL Zoom in that pool. And the format for that type of hand is that there's a question mark after the hero, meaning that at the final decision point in the hand, usually the river, but sometimes the flop, the turn, or pre-flop, we have to try and work out as an audience like what I am going to do there. And why. But also, the earlier streets where the line is given should serve as kind of instructive streets as well. The other format that we're not going to see today, but we will see in the next podcast when a student gives me an odd number, hopefully, is going to be hands played by my students in the poker student community, of which Laurie is a part, and, critiquing their line and seeing if we agree with it or disagree with it, basically. So 2 types of hand, odd, even, 50 of each sort, 100 hands, big, long essays for analyses. I'll be quoting some of the essays, like some of the extracts from the book today as they become relevant. But my student's job here is to basically ask me questions, tell me what he thinks the line is going to be, and just starting from pre-flop, pick my brain about anything he wants to discuss in that hand or what he thinks is going on. So let's hear a bit about you first, man. So what's your kind of poker background up until now?
Yeah, so I've been playing poker sort of on and off about 10 years, I guess, since the boom. I never really took it too seriously, but I discovered live poker about 6 months ago and the casino, and been playing cash games down there about 40, 50 hours a month for the last 6 months. Been really enjoying that and sort of having a bit of a poker renaissance, I suppose.
Nice, cool. So you sort of playing like semi-professionally right now, or just as a hobby?
Yeah, I'm spending enough time and making money that it's semi-professional, yeah, I suppose.
Cool.
I still work full-time as well, so I do have dreams of perhaps going full-time, but I think I need some more hours, more proof that I can make it,
Yeah, definitely. It's a lot of time to spend in a casino as well. How's the scene down there in Brighton, south of England? So do they run like some higher stakes games as well? Is that feasible?
Not so much. There's a big 2-5 PLO game. It's 2-5-10 really, but I haven't played much PLO. That's a bit out of my bankroll. Anything bigger than that, you need to go to London, really.
Yeah, I mean, you're not too far away, I guess, in Brighton. Like it's like an hour or something, isn't it?
You can do it. Like if you're a professional, you'd make the effort, I think. But there's pretty good one or two games here. So
cool.
That's what I've been playing.
All right. So how did you get on with the hand analyses that I sent out? Did you feel confident in your sort of answers and your analysis of the hands?
Yeah, I found the hands not too hard. There was the second hand we'll probably do, the 8-7 hand I thought was the trickiest, but we'll see. I didn't realise you'd played the hand.
Right.
You
were probably going through being like, what a fish, what's this student of his doing? Like, what an idiot. Yeah. The thing is, like, I'm choosing spots intentionally that are not like crazy spots. Like sometimes you'll see a poker book and it's like, oh, we're 400 BBs deep and the flop got like double check raised, and then or the flop and turn got double check raised, and then the river, this weird thing happened, and people don't really learn a hell of a lot from that about how to like have a solid, consistent grind win rate in the common spots. So I guess what I've tried to do is take a mixture, really. Some spots that are rarer and a bit more flamboyant, and then other ones where all that's really going on is we're facing a standard decision about like what hands to bluff in our range after a certain course of action by us and by villain and things like that. So anyway, so the first hand that you chose was hand number 4. So what we're going to do is start discussing hand number 4. I'm going to explain for the podcast audience what's actually going on, since you won't be able to see it. So for anyone watching on YouTube, this is what it looks like. This is the kind of the idea here. It's not really to scale as it'll appear in the book, but that's what hand history is going to kind of look like. I've made it spruced up a little bit from the Grounder's Manual. Hopefully it looks a bit nicer. For anyone who doesn't know, Grounder's Manual was my first book. This is my second book. So anyway, like this hand here, hand number 4, hero is in the small blind and villain is a reg who is under the gun. Now villain stats are 21, 16, 7% 3-bet. So there's not a whole lot to actually draw from that right away. I mean, I'm just putting that in there so that the audience can see what type of a player this is, i.e. a standard but not out of control reg. Not that we should be using these stats too specifically to gain any kind of relevant reads for this hand, other than player type. So Under the Gun is opening to 150. This is a 50 NL game, so the big blind is 50 cents. Under the Gun is opening to 150. 3 folds to hero in the small blind, who starts off with a 3-bet to $5, i.e. 10 big blinds opposite the 3 big blind open and Under the Gun calls. So first decision point is pre-flop. What do you think is going on here, Laurie?
Yeah, so this raise actually surprised me. I would generally against the Under the Gun open with a pocket pair, I would generally look to set mine in this position. So it is obviously towards the mid higher end of the pocket pairs, but I would be worried about being 4-bet here and folding really, depending on the size.
Yeah, so definitely, yeah, good. Sorry, I'll let you finish. I cut you off a little bit prematurely.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, so yeah, I would, just in the way I normally play, I would call here pretty much 100% of the time, unless I had any specific reads on the villain.
Okay, I'll talk you through some situations where I definitely would call here. Live in almost any game ever, online and at lower stakes, online in a more passive player pool, online with a known fish in the big blind. Basically what this boils down to is the move towards playing linear 3-bet ranges out the small blind. And the reason for playing these linear ranges where we start from aces and we just 3-bet everything we're playing is not that we want to be like super value heavy and we think that 9s is necessarily like a great 3-bet. It's more that we don't really want to develop a flatting range when we are not closing the action. We're in the small blind with lesser pot odds and people are squeezing basically more and more these days. So this move towards being linear in the small blind is definitely like a newer thing. It's something that we're doing in the last couple of years. It used to just be against cutoff and button opens where we thought the squeezes were like the most prevalent, like we're going to run into them the most. More recently, people are squeezing more actively even against like hijack and Under the Gun 6 max because every opening range is fairly wide in 6 max. Like you don't really have the uber nutted ranges that you have Under the Gun in like a 10-handed table or something like that. So I guess this idea is that we don't think that it's necessarily in a vacuum better to 3-bet than to flat, although the EV of each play, there are advantages and disadvantages to both. Like for 3-betting, you're going to be taking the pot down a lot more often without losing to hands like King Queen that fold to your 3-bet and things like that post-flop. You're going to be just improving your red line, and occasionally you'll be 3-betting and flopping amazingly in a 3-bet pot. The disadvantages are obviously that you kill your implied odds, you give up on the idea that this could be a profitable set mine, and you can... The other disadvantage of calling, however, is that you can get squeezed and be forced to just not see the flop anyway, having invested 3 big blinds, which is generally pretty bad. So in a vacuum, there are upsides, there are downsides. This is in line with a coherent strategy to not develop a flatting range at all in the small blind online. It's more of a long-term view, but to summarize, I don't think it's massively better to call here than it is to 3-bet here, even in a vacuum, although I think like traditionally calling was always the more popular line in the past. What do you think?
Yeah,
Makes sense?
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
We're really kind of squeeze paranoid these days, in that when we've capped our range by flatting, we're aware that we just have a complete inability to defend against a squeeze out position due to having a big uncapped versus capped disadvantage.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And people have actually started like playing 3-bet or fold on the button now as well, and then the cutoff and things like that at the higher zoom pools, which is a newer development and is a bit of a more drastic reaction. But then the idea is there's multiple people ahead that could squeeze. But anyway, we'll move on from pre-flop. I could give you... Let's see if I've got a quote from the book that would actually relate to the pre-flop. So basically what I've said here is our 3-bet pre-flop is part of a linear strategy. I approve of developing small blind flatting ranges against Under the Gun in tame games, and 3-betting polar becomes an option whenever hero has a flatting range. But a polar approach is undesirable against a reg who folds less than half the time, and I think that's happening more and more. You know, people are folding less and less online to 3-bets anyway. They're flatting more which makes the 3-bet linear a lot better. So that's the general consensus there. I won't read on forever, but that's the idea. So the flop comes down here after we 3-bet and get called. Ace of clubs, jack of hearts, 6 of diamonds. We have 9 of hearts, 9 of clubs. We have, 1 heart and 1 club so far. Not that we have backdoored anything, but we've maybe backdoored blockers on some runouts. Very irrelevant point for now. So on ace jack 6, we start off by checking this flop. So what do you think is going on at this point?
Well, it's obviously not an ideal flop for our hand. Perhaps. Sorry, you cut out there.
Sorry, no, I'm listening. I'm here.
Oh, sure, yeah, just the signal way. Okay. I think I might be right. So we 3-bet pre-flop. So perhaps it's a better flop for our range than it is for the villain. But it does also hit his under the gun raising range. Sure. We have some showdown value, obviously, where we have quite good showdown value. It is vulnerable. Any card higher is going to be a problem. I guess there's just quite a few gut shots as well that could hit the villain. I do feel like I'd probably bet here because our showdown value is weak, and I feel like if we check, this might not make much sense, but or form a well-formed argument. But if we check out position, I feel like we kind of lose the initiative here, and we're gonna basically give up this hand a lot of the time.
Yeah, we are definitely check folding this flop. That's for sure. Once we check here, I think the idea is that when we're out of position, and we're also on a board where villain is connecting very often, and villain doesn't even necessarily need to be capped here. Like under the gun raisers are not always going to deploy any 4-bet strategy at all. Like in this situation, for instance, if I was under the gun, and I'm not saying every reg plays like this at 50 NL, but I wouldn't have a 4-bet range against a small blind 3-bet from under the gun. Basically, there's too few hands that I'm happy 4-betting and just getting it in with. There's not that much of a reason to want the 4-bet bluff because my range is not that wide. I can defend enough of it just by flatting anyway if I keep that uncapped. And 4-betting is just really far less effective than it would be, say, blind versus blind or button versus small blind or something like that. So I guess the idea here is that we're actually at a slight disadvantage if that is the case. And if villain is kind of capped and doesn't have aces or kings, he can still have ace-king easily given the positions, ace-jack, ace-queen, pocket jacks. These are all hands that are very much in his range. So we have a very small to non-existent range advantage on this flop, and we have a positional disadvantage. And because of that, I would actually recommend we do a fair bit of checking here. There's also a lot of, but you can see here the difference between our thought process is that I've kind of started off planning my strategy, whereas you started off defining how you feel about nines in a vacuum, which is fine, and oftentimes you need to understand that. But I'm trying to see what the most coherent overall strategy is, because I feel if we start betting nines on this flop, we're going to have an undefensibly wide betting range, and we're going to be betting too many hands with poor equity when called, and we'll struggle on the turn, probably given villain's position and villain's range is quite strong in this texture. I'll give you a quote from the book at this point. So I've defined quite a vigorously defined a strategy here. So there's quite a lot actually going on. Sorry, that's the wrong hand I'm looking at. Hand 4, Rowan, right? Yeah. So basically what I've decided upon here is a polarized kind of strategy on the flop, where we have a very abundant checking range. So I'm actually advising that we protect this hand by also checking a lot of other hands like ace king, ace queen, kings and queens on this board of ace jack 6 and check calling that range. The problem is that if we bet like ace king and ace queen here, like either we're betting everything, which I don't think is that defensible out of position. I don't think it's the best way to play on a board that smashes villain and we're out of position, or we end up kind of bloating that betting range if we're betting ace king, ace queen and leaving our checking range a bit undefensible. So to bolster our checking range here, I'm recommending that we check call all of those kind of hands as well as ace ace, which, why do you think we check call pocket aces on ace jack 6? What's the rationale there?
Is it for balance?
It's for balance, yeah, but what do you think makes aces like a very useful check calling hand?
Because it's the absolute nuts, and we don't have it. It's not vulnerable in any way.
It's not vulnerable from our point of view, but if you think of it from villain's point of view, what does it do to his range if we have those two aces?
It means he's very unlikely to have an ace.
Right, so it takes away many of the hands that we'd normally be targeting with value bets, therefore weighting villain's range more towards air like king, queen, or pocket eights that might be bluffing. So
Sure,
aces makes a very nice bluff catcher. So definitely I'd recommend in spots where you're out of position in 3-bet pot against a strong under the gun range that you do a lot of checking. I think there's also a lot of hands in our range here that naturally really like to check, such as pocket kings, pocket queens, ace 10 suited, things like this that just aren't really big fans of betting here. I mean, even ace queen is not going to be a fan of building a gigantic pot here. It's going to quite like check calling the flop, an ace jack 6 against this range. So I don't think we're going to want to bet too often here. So my problem with betting nines is that if we bet that right away on the flop, we're probably just creating too much of a betting range, and it's going to kind of mess up the strategy of what I'm doing here. I think in a vacuum, betting is not necessarily much worse than checking with nines. I don't think there's a huge difference, although I'm not a huge fan of the bet, given how strong villain is and how little fold equity I think we'll have. But, put it this way, our range is going to suffer if we bet nines here. And in a vacuum, if we bet nines here and villain floats with king queen, who do you think is going to actually win that pot most of the time?
Sorry, I don't quite understand.
So if we bet nines on the flop, right, on this ace jack 6, and villain calls us with king queen, what do you think is going to end up happening there for the most part?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about his outs, like he's got 10 outs,
right,
and we're out of position, so he can perhaps even give our bluffers off.
Yeah, so we're probably going to lose the hand one way or the other anyway. Yeah. So betting doesn't, unless we actually have more fold equity and villain has more air in his range, betting a hand like nines isn't really going to accomplish much. And the problem with your line of thought is partially that you're trying to protect a hand when it's just not the best hand often enough to be protected. I think that's the vacuum issue here. That if you try to bet nines when you're getting such a strong range out of position, you'll protect its equity occasionally, but you won't even succeed by doing that against king queen suited and all the time if villain floats. And then again, like you're going to just burn money when you've got 2 outs and you're drawing near dead that you don't need to burn by check folding the flop. So I definitely put this in a check fold range for all of those reasons. Looking to check call a lot on this board and basically just bet very polarized betting. I guess some of my king queen I would be betting here. I'd be betting some of my like as a bluff. I'd be betting hands like ace jack. I'd be betting hands like pocket jacks for value, but I'm not betting. I'm usually checking this board due to the natural advantages and disadvantages in play here.
Mm-hmm.
Happy with that?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so by the way, for your live kind of venture, a lot of this stuff is not going to be that relevant, and you'll be right to just think mainly in a vacuum about these spots. But this is us trying to like nail a strategy that can be consistent in tough games as well.
Yeah, certainly.
Turns a king of hearts, right? So the flop checks through. The ace jack 6 rainbow board checks through. So the board now reads on the turn ace jack 6 king, and the jack and the king are both hearts. We have the 9 of hearts and 9 of clubs. Pot's $10.50, and at this point in the hand, yours truly leads out for $6.50 into $10.50. What do you think's going on now? Did this surprise you?
This surprised me a lot, yeah. This seems like a terrible card for us. It's very hard to think of any hands that the villain has that haven't connected in some way. Yeah. It feels like if we're making this bet, it needs to be part of a double barrel strategy. We need to bet river as well.
Yeah, and I think we're betting turn polarized enough that we probably are going to bet river most of the time with our value range there, and maybe just give up a few of our bluffs or something. Yeah, I think that's definitely you're on the ball there with that. Yeah.
So I mean, I would just check, but if I was going to bet, so I mean, I think the only hands. So we're only going to get queens and tens to fold. Everything else that's beating us will call.
For now, yes.
For now, yeah. So yeah.
But let's think a bit deeper about ranges here. If we don't bet nines, what are we bluffing? What do you think the bottom of our range actually is at this point? Do we have
anything we 3-bet out of the small blind with? So yeah, we must be pretty close to the bottom of our range.
Yeah, absolutely, because we're 3-betting a linear range in the first place, right? So this hand is actually a really cool example of when your range becomes so bad that nines is actually like, or your range is so showdowny, I guess you could say. Like, it's not a great card for our hand, it's a terrible card for our hand, but it's so bad for our hand that it makes this hand like the worst thing that we can have. And if we are going to have any kind of bluffing range at all here, then we better be putting nines into it. I mean, nines is basically the worst thing we can have. So that's the idea. Like, we're basically looking to ensure that we actually have some kind of a betting range in this spot that's not just for value. We don't want to just be betting here when we have ace king or pocket kings or something like that. We want to balance it. And if villain is going to mindlessly call down twice with king queen, he's clearly a complete fish, because our range is balanced here and we have plenty of value hands when we make this bet, and he probably shouldn't be calling down two streets that wide. So don't worry about this. This is purely just to balance ourselves, and nines is literally going to lose every time at showdown. And you kind of said that yourself, when you said this hand is losing to pretty much everything villain has because villain's always connected. This is true. But if we can make villain fold pocket tens, queen jack, king queen, ace rag by the river, then we've gained a lot of EV, because you can imagine these two nines as actually being a deuce and a three here. That's how little showdown value they have, relatively.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah, I like it.
Cool. So I guess we've said here that in the book, I quote, what this means is that Hero's range is now so strong that 9-9 to 10-10 don't need to check fold anymore, because we checked so much stuff on the flop, right? And the reason you're confused is that you're betting more on the flop than I am, right? But remember, I've checked a lot on the flop. So to continue quoting, these hands can turn themselves into bluffs and be balanced by all the value combos above, which I'm referring to, which are things like ace king, ace queen, kings, things like that, basically, that have now pocket aces I've checked on the flop as well. So I've got plenty of stuff. I've then continued, I quote, if Hero does not turn 9-9 into a bluff on this turn, then he has in fact no bluffing range dash a strategic blunder. And it's hard to see that this could be a huge blunder to check this turn, but in strategy land it actually is. It's kind of shocking, but it is, it's true. It's actually to play a completely unbalanced strategy for no good reason.
Yeah.
Right, so we bet 650 under the gun calls, which we're not really at all surprised by, because we think he's got a lot of hands that will naturally maybe just exploitatively call once without thinking too hard about it. When I say exploitatively, I just mean that that's their natural function to call. Like, villain might not be planning his calling frequencies like completely properly here. The river comes at 2 of hearts, which completes the backdoor flush. We do have the 9 of hearts. We still have pocket nines. We still have the bottom of our range. River, the pot's 2350. Hero question mark. This is where you try and decide what you want to do. What's your line here, Laurie?
Well, I mean, kind of said it, if we're going to bet the turn, we have to bet the river. Like, as you said, we have 0 showdown value.
Yeah.
We have to bet this. So it's just a real question of sizing. I guess, are you betting any river? That would be one question. I mean, this feels like a decent river to bet. But would you bet any river?
I think nines is so bad that if you're ever going to have a value range, you need to be bluffing nines as well. So that question really can be reduced to, are there any rivers on which I don't want a betting range because they're just massively better for villain? Clearly a king river and an ace river are the ones that are massively better for villain. It's possible that I would just give up on that and check my whole range or something like that in theory. In practice, I probably wouldn't, because no one would bluff me enough on that river, so I wouldn't want to check call any nutted combos. I just want to bet. So in practice, no, but in theory, it might be technically correct to not have a betting range on a king river or something like that. I wouldn't be worried about that too much. I don't think the population's adapting to this very extreme board run out as they should in a balanced way. I think they're more likely just playing their hand in it, and that will lead to, whenever the board texture is kind of extreme, playing your cards just in a vacuum will lead to taking some fairly unbalanced lines just naturally. So what I've said here is I've tried to design a kind of bluffing frequency. So I've said, assume we choose a pot size bet of 2350, which is the pot. This size should work well for a value range of king, king, ace, 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 king, which is, a strong range, but not completely the nuts. Overbetting would be more attractive, I've written here, if villain couldn't have hands like ace of hearts, queen of hearts, ace of hearts, 10 of hearts. But as we can see here, villain can have a flush. Villain can actually still have the nuts here. So overbetting and sticking the rest in or something is not sensible against an uncapped range. So I've written here, as far as ratios are concerned, Hero should have 1 bluff for every 2 value hands when he makes a pot size bet. This is GTO math. In the Grounders Manual, we learned that this is due to villain's required equity being 33% and our desire to make calling with a bluff catcher 0 EV for villain. So these are just extracts to give you guys a flavour of what the writing is like in 100 hands. I'm kind of jumping about a bit here, but the idea is that if we're going to bet that value range, we need to be 2 to 1 value to bluffs. Nines is the very worst hand we can possibly have. Therefore, putting nines in a bluffing range is not going to be too many bluffs. It's not going to overload that. It's only 6 combos of trash. So I think absolutely big river bet, but not an over bet would be the way to go here. Shall we move on?
Okay. Yeah, so you bet about pot, would you? Just under pot, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, definitely. Because the value hands I have here, like ace king, pocket kings, pocket aces, are still very strong. They're still very happy to bet that kind of size. I don't have jacks. I don't have ace jacks. I would bet the flop with those, but on this board, run out of ace jack, 6 king deuce. I do definitely have hands like ace king and things like that. Final point: it's incorrect to just bluff all of your 9s and none of your 10s. What you actually want to do here is bluff every 9s or 10s combo that has the 9 or 10 of hearts in it. That blocks flushes, just in case villain is playing 10-9 suited this way or something like that, queen 10 suited this way, etc. 9s and 10s have the same showdown value, so don't just bluff 9s and not 10s, bluff whatever has a heart. That's the right answer here. Okay, should we move on? I seem to have lost the sound here, so I'm going to have to quickly pause this. Alright, sorry about that, guys. I lost you there. Yeah, I can hear you. I lost you there for a second. Not sure what was going on there. Anyway, should we move on to the next hand now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Right, so that is hand number 18.
Okay, yeah.
Right, so hand 18 is... Or I think we'll only have time to do one more. So did you say you thought hand 42 was maybe more interesting and you found it more difficult?
Yeah, that felt trickier for me, yeah.
Okay, let's just go straight to hand number 42 then. So hand 42, we're actually in the big blind in the same game, 50 NL Zoom pool. We've got 8 of spades, 7 of hearts, so pretty bad hand, 8-7 off, but not unplayable in all situations. Under the gun folds, hijack folds, cutoff raises, min. Cutoff's a reg 2016-7. This min open from the cutoff is something that's becoming a bit more common because Button has started playing 3-bet or fold. So when Button plays 3-bet or fold, Cutoff doesn't really want to bet big, otherwise he's investing more money out of position to get 3-bet. Button's not flatting anyway, so incentivize Button to flat. That's kind of, I guess, what's going on in the meta just now, if you like to use that kind of gaming term. The meta of poker is crazy. It's just like always changing as we like adopt all these new strategies. So I'll just go down to this in the book. So facing this min open then in the big blind, what did you think about our call? We've just flatted the min open here. Did you think that was okay, or did that surprise you?
I would be unsure in a live environment, but in the environment you're describing online, I think we need to have a call. We need to defend this big blind, and we're getting a good price to do so.
Yeah.
These aren't the most amazing cards, but do you still advocate a polar strategy out of the big blind? So therefore, we need a calling range. And
yeah, I mean, we definitely have a calling range, regardless of whether we're polar or linear. Because if we are linear, then it's lack of fold equity linear. It's not like small blind linear where we don't flat anything. So in lack of fold equity linear, as I quote from the book, I use that term, started using that term now. Lack of fold equity linear is all about just 3-betting because we don't expect fold equity. So we do still have a calling range there, but we just 3-bet linear, stronger hands, because we expect to often get action after we 3-bet. I do recommend being polar, fill in folds a lot, but the default strategy that I now recommend in the modern day in tougher games is a mixed strategy, where you ensure basically that your 3-bet bluffs are not just garbage. Because in this spot, if we can flat 8-7 off, what would that do to our bluffs if we played strictly polarized? It would make them really weak, right? They'd be like terrible hands.
Sure, okay.
So we'd kind of want to avoid that because people are flatting more these days. So the meta's kind of moving towards us playing a mixed 3-bet game and not, not adhering to strict polar kind of approaches anymore. So in that strategy, this hand would be too weak to 3-bet. It would just be a call, and we take the pot odds and run, basically. We just go to the flop.
Yeah. One thing I was thinking is this is going to be a very tricky hand to play out of position. It's not going to flop that well very often. But that's why I was sort of hesitant to call.
Right. When you define strategies post-flop and you figure out what your range looks like and how to play a solid strategy, it becomes a lot simpler to play this hand. I wouldn't worry about it too much, because when you know where this hand slots into your range in a wide range versus wide range battle, it's fine, and it's just higher EV than folding generally. So don't worry about that too much. That will get easier as you get coaching from me, and you learn how to think more in terms of planning your range. Okay, so I've actually called this pre-flop in the book. I've said I make a very standard defend to a min open. I've gone on and explained a little bit about the cutoff min-open strategy and what's going on there, just like I did with you. I've said here our 3-bet strategy is mixed. The suited counterpart to this hand and its close relatives will have some 3-bet frequency assigned to them. So I will 3-bet sometimes here with 8-7 suited because it's a more robust hand that can handle a 3-bet pot a bit better. It has more nut potential, whereas 8-7 off is going to be a call. And this is quite different from like the polar strategies that were first introduced, I guess, in the Grounders Manual. Mm-hmm. On the flop then, we check cutoff bets 150 and we decide to call. So flop is 10-9 deuce rainbow. We have 8-7 rainbow, so there are no backdoor draws or anything here at all. Flop's 2.25. He bets 150. We flat the 150. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean we about 23%, and we've got up and down. We've got 8 outs on the next, so like 16% to straight. I don't think our implied odds are very good because he's got a ridiculously wide range, and there's a ton of air in it. So I think we need to be prepared to maybe bluff some turns if we're going to be calling this as well.
Yeah. I mean, here's the main relationship, right? Is that when implied odds are less, future fold equity is more. This is an inverse relationship I first introduced in the Grounders Manual, and it will always be true. It's like it's like Newton's law, one of the universal laws of poker that won't change no matter what happens to the meta, thankfully. So we know that when we call here, we will have some implied odds, if not from villain having a strong range classically, then from villain applying a lot of pressure because it's wide range against wide range. So sometimes your implied odds, weird concept, don't come from villain's range being strong. They come from it being late position reg war where a lot of aggression goes in. That gives you implied odds too. So I don't agree that there's really bad implied odds here. I think there are reasonable implied odds for sure. But I think that what we lack in implied odds, we do gain in future fold equity also. So we always have a reason to defend here and know that it'll be plus EV in a vacuum, basically. And as far as our strategy is concerned, we simply must defend this hand. Like, we can't be folding like open-end straight draws. Otherwise, we should have just folded pre because we are being enormous nets on the flop. Yeah. So I guess what I've said here then... I've just completely lost my place in this, so I'll come back to that in a minute. So we call the flop. What do you think about raising flop? Did you consider that?
I didn't. I do quite like it though, because we're going to get a ton of folds, and it's a good semi-bluff. We take the initiative.
What do you mean by a ton of folds? Like, what percentage would you translate that as?
Interesting. That would be a tricky card for me. Well, I mean, we take so he's opening with 16% of hands, and from the cutoff, or 25%. I'm not quite sure how that translates. So he gets it with 25% of his hands, and then what percentage of them is he? I guess is he going to be calling? Is he going to be calling us with complete air? He's not. So presumably he's connected in some way. So I guess you'd have to break down that 25%, find out which of them have maybe a gut shot he would call with. Probably not though. Probably needs at least a pair.
Well, he should be calling with a gut shot because if he has something like King Queen, then he's very far up his range in terms of suitability. This is a board.
Yeah, he's got overs as well then, right?
Yeah, he should be floating sometimes as well. He can't just play like a net and just fold everything that's not second pair or better. Like, he can fold pocket fives, like some horrible underpair, but if he's got a hand with relatively decent nut potential and draws, then he should be floating in position because this is big blind against cutoff, and I'm not repping that many great hands here by raising. However, so I'll just go straight to the book here and actually say what I've said. I've said developing a raising range on this flop is permissible, but less attractive against villains' larger sizing. So the large sizing, I continue, does two things. Firstly, it makes villains' pot odds unattractive if he does happen to be c-betting too wide. So I'll interject here in real time. So what that means is that basically villain's already given himself a bad enough price by betting 115 to 225 that we're not as concerned about calling and then villain getting 2 cards for that price with our range as we would be if he'd bet 40% pot. So we have less incentive to raise against the bigger size because villain's already put more money in the pot and made his own pot odds worse. Secondly, this sizing is more commonly the symptom of a polarized c-betting range against which raising is not such a good idea. So the larger sizing tends to indicate that he's not just always betting, that he has a checking range of some sort, which means that if his range is more polar, like decent draws and stronger value hands, then raising is not going to be as lucrative with our range. So again, I'm kind of just deviating to thinking about our range and not so much just exactly this combo. I think it's also worth pointing out that if we raised every time we had 8-7, we'd end up with no 8-7 in our calling range and too many bluffs if we did that with all our straight draws. So we want to kind of split this hand up if we are going to have a raising range, but I don't think it's totally necessary to have a raising range against this flop sizing.
Yeah.
Okay, on the turn, is the Queen of Diamonds, which is like one of the worst cards for our hand, but how good is the Queen of Diamonds for our range? 10, 9, deuce, queen with 2 diamonds now on board.
I guess it's pretty good for our range when we just call. I guess my first instinct was that it's a bad card for us because he picks up a lot more equity. So we don't have a hand, right? So our decision is whether to bluff on this turn. I don't think that the queen. Well, I think the Queen of Diamonds gives him lots of his hands equity that he would call with. I guess on the same token, it also gives us it may well allow us to represent a stronger hand ourselves.
Yeah, it does, but I think the problem with developing a leading range here is just how uncapped the villain actually is. Like, he does still have like all of the sets which we may not have if we 3-bet them pre. He can have King Jack, which we'd raise sometimes on the flop. I think he's probably got a slight advantage here and he's in position. So it's a very good turn card for both players, but I think donking out on it is a bit of an ambitious strategy. I don't think there's enough hands we really want to donk out with here to balance that. It would really need to be a very polar thing, and I'm not really sure I like it that much. If we were going to build a donking range here, I don't think it's the most ridiculous thing in the world. Then I think 8-7 would make like a fairly... I'm not sure. It's hard for us to have that much air now on the queen, so 8-7 could perhaps become a donk bluff, but let's say we're going to check the turn. I guess with a hand like this, we could go for a check raise here, because it's very difficult for us to actually have air, and we can rep a lot of good hands. Like, so many of our other floats have just got there or made a pair they don't need to bluff with now. We are not going to get to this turn with very much air, so I think it does become important to raise sometimes when we do have still 8 high. So I've actually said here, the turn is not a bad spot to check raise. Our larger flop floats are either nutted or very showdown heavy now, and so we'll be leaving our bluffing range at this juncture, meaning that they are not going to bluff anymore. Like King, Queen, etc. has no need to bluff raise, right? So what are we bluff raising if we don't bluff raise 8-7, sorry. So I think check raising here would be very viable. I think it's a very normal line to take. It makes some sense, and villain has a lot of hands that, yes, are strong, but can't necessarily call like turn raises and big river bets and things like that. So again, just making sure that we've got this bluffing range is definitely like a theme here. As played though, villain actually checks behind, so we don't get to check raise the turn. So we move on to the river, which is the ace of hearts. The board now reading 10, 9, deuce, queen, ace, no flushes possible, 2 diamonds on the turn. We have 8-7. What did you think about our river decision?
Well, I feel like it's quite a similar situation to before. We don't have any showdown value, and I feel like the villain's still got a very wide range. You said it's uncapped, but he raised in a late position. He made a c-bet, and then that's all he's really done. This is not a great, obviously an ace is not a great card for us, and he can certainly hit that card, but I feel like he could also have a lot of hands that we can fold out here, and we also have 0 showdown equity. Like, we have 8 high.
Yeah. I think villain's range is kind of capped now, that on the turn he checks back. Like, I wouldn't expect him to have King Jack, like, ever. But he can hit the ace as well. I totally agree with all of that. But yeah, we have to bet the river, right? Because another thing here is that we actually have an uncapped range. Villain doesn't, but we could have King Jack. We could have Jack 8. We could have the straights, the sets, whatever. We don't need to have a raising range on that flop against the big c-bet. On the turn, it goes check, and we're still checking to the flop better. So the main point here is that while villain's range is capped, ours is uncapped, and this is where the idea of the overbet becomes really, really cool, because he has a limited hand strength, almost for sure, and we don't. Therefore, when we are value betting big hands, they always win. They never tie, they never lose. Like when we bet like a set here, or King Jack, or Jack 8, it pretty much always wins. So we can develop a strategy where, at least with some of our range, we bet like really, really big, and we apply loads of pressure with like all the 7-8 combos at the same time. So I think it would definitely be reasonable to just smash this river like very large. And the line I've actually taken here is I've recommended the coach's line. Hero bets 940 into 525, which is a massive bet, but I think it's grounded in logic, certainly.
Yeah. So if I was playing against you in this hand, I would not think you could have sets, because I would expect sets to raise on the flop or at least lead out the turn,
right?
As the board gets wetter, and I would also see that most of the draws missed. I mean, they all miss straight. So Queen Jack has a pair, but they're going to check. So I wouldn't see what you're betting with other than King Jack, really.
Okay, well, I would have Jack 8, King Jack in my value range, pocket 10s, pocket 9s, pocket deuces, probably something like that. Maybe some really good 2-pair as well. The thing is on the flop that I don't think I need a raising range at that point, and I would never lead the turn, like I said, just because like you still have an advantage as the cutoff here, and I'm probably going to check raise when I choose to play back. I don't think it's ridiculous to have a leading range on the turn, like I said, but I wouldn't assume that a reg has a leading range on the turn. I think that's quite an offbeat thing to see these days. Maybe more common live than online, but I try not to make that assumption generally that people would lead out with their strongest hands on the turn when they just called the flop. I don't think it's that common. But yeah, I can see why you think that I'm a bit more capped than I am. However, what can I be bluffing with? Is that not maybe a more interesting question? What air did I get to this situation with?
Sure, yeah, that is interesting. Well, obviously 8-7, Queen Jack, but you'd probably check that.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a ton of air really, is there at all?
So I guess the point is here, I think the population might be under bluffing here when they overbet, just because they don't really get here with very much air. They don't turn a pair into a bluff enough. So I wouldn't be too hasty to snap this off. If you do snap this off against me, I don't care, because I'll balance my range to the point that I call for you 0 EV. So if you're playing against me with a bluff catcher, you could probably just reason, okay, he's probably balanced. So if I didn't have reads on you, like I'm not right off the bat just going to start over bluffing or under bluffing my range. I'm going to have a kind of balanced ratio for the sizing I pick. So if you call, you will get around your required equity normally in a spot like this, unless I've got a read on you. So, you know, if you do bluff catch me here, you're going to do okay, but you're not going to like exploit me. I'll make sure of that with my range construction. Like I'll make sure I'm not, like I don't have that much air anyway, and I'll make sure I've got enough value hands to balance it for that size, so that I'm only bluffing around, you know, I've bet double pots, so I only want to be bluffing around 40% of the time to make your call break even. So that's what I'll aim to do if I don't know you. If I see though that you try and catch me here with like a 9, like some really weak hand, or like, you know, just some hero call, then I'm definitely going to start under bluffing in future against you, and that's where you might run into trouble. Like right now, it'll be kind of, you know, I'm playing in a balanced way, so it's not going to matter. But what I would then do is if I see someone hero call me here, or if I see someone fold every time here or something, if I'm playing the same opponent heads up, is I'd then move to exploit it after that. So start off balanced and then go from there. But I can balance myself with this overbet. I will take the same line with some of my value hands as well. But yeah, really interesting spot, and it definitely, the main point here is that when villain caps himself on the turn like that and you're still uncapped, betting big becomes a very viable option, and you can do it balanced. You don't have to do it like being too bluff heavy.
Yeah, I like it.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming on, man. That was really interesting. Sorry we didn't get through all of the hands, but those two were quite complex beasts. So in the book, there's actually like essays written about them. Like I was quoting like a couple of sentences from a couple of pages of analysis. So what you got there was very much a fly through kind of summary. When the book comes out, you can get your teeth into like literally essays for 100 hands. It's killing me writing it. I feel like I'm doing the biggest dissertation ever for the most horrible university, but it's almost there, and it's poker, so it can't be that bad, right? It's always going to be a little bit interesting.
I can't wait to read it, so
cool.
I'm sure.
Well, thanks very much for coming on. I tell you what, after we've got started with coaching and done a few sessions of our block that you've bought, we can have you back on for a few more hands or whatever and see how your range work. I'd say as feedback, you know, work more on what's happening with both players' ranges and not just so much focused on like the 2 hole cards in front of us right now. I'd say that's the biggest thing to work on. But your thought process is logical. It just needs to grow outwards and start incorporating more range work.
Sure.
All right, man. So thank you very much again. Listeners, you can get the book from probably September, October onwards. I'm hoping to get it done by the end of September, but I'll keep you updated on this podcast. Keep following along. We're getting close now. Hopefully, if you bought Grinder's Manual, you're eagerly awaiting it. I'm certainly really pumped to get it out to you guys. I'm really excited. Still taking on students. Just email me, admin@carrotcorner.com. Check out my website, carrotcorner.com, for more stuff from me, articles, that kind of thing. And yeah, I will see you guys on the next one. Thanks for watching.